George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Well, it's a 1 for the money, 2 for the show. You better get ready now, go cat go. You can tell I saw the Elvis movie this week, can't you? But I'll tell you what, it's going to be rock and roll radio with pictures this evening. There is sleaze dripping everywhere. Out of the government, out of the cabinet room, out of Boris Johnson's own private quarters in the British Parliament. More on Oralgate later. Is that what they're calling it? Oralgate? That's what I call it. Anyway, and of course in the SNP, where their chief whip turns out to be a pincher also. And the Labour Party has Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, leader and deputy leader of the Labour Party. Have they been fined by the Durham Police Authority? And if they have, it's curtains and it's off to the races for the choosing of a new Labour leader. Or will Sir Keir Integrity himself try and get out of the pledge he's already made that if fined by the police for Beergate in Durham, he will resign? Maybe he'll elect to go to court and put his faith in, I don't know, a sheriff that Labour appointed. Who knows what the next moves will be, but we'll be talking about it tonight. We'll be talking about the aforementioned Elvis and the movie, the movie also. And, of course, there's much else happening in the world. We'll be talking to the King of Israel, the last man standing, Gideon Levy of Haaretz, the only piece of journalistic real estate worthy of the name left in Israel. And we'll be talking to our old friend Rachel Blevins, the Rose of Texas, who's now blooming in Moscow. And we'll be talking, of course, about Africa, about the Melilla massacre, a massacre that happened in plain sight and which nobody anywhere seems to be remotely concerned about. Have you seen it on the news? I certainly haven't. This is the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you get to speak back to the teacher. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride, because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
He ain't nothing but a hound dog, that is for sure. Boris Johnson on his way to Heartbreak Hotel. The British government, indeed the British system of governance, is coming apart at the seams. We are in the uncharted waters, unprecedented, of the leadership of both the government and the opposition, falling into existential crisis at precisely the same time. Let's hope war doesn't break out, because who'd want to be in a war where our whole destiny was in the hands of that hound dog, Boris Johnson, and in the hands of Sir Keir Starmer, if indeed he is still here at this time of night. Let's start, of course, with the government, because the fish rots from the top. I'll start at the top, though I could have started, if you will forgive me, further down towards the bottom. But at the top, we have a situation where the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, obese, debauched, a man stumbling from scandal to scandal, crisis to crisis, is hanging on to the wheel by giving away billions of pounds of our money to a government and a leader in even bigger, deeper trouble than he is. I refer, of course, to President Zelensky of the Ukraine. Whenever there's trouble, Boris Johnson is on the plane, whether it's to Kigali, although he's the only one taking flights to Rwanda these days, certainly not the flagship policy that he announced, that the people coming across in rubber dinghies in their thousands every week would not touch the beaches before they were on their way to Rwanda. But Boris was there, along with Prince Charles, revealed last Sunday to have received £3 million in cash in plastic bags, one of them a Fortnum and Mason's tasteful canvassy type bag, £3 million in cash from another potentate, the former King Emir of the Emirate of Qatar, who are hosting the World Cup in just a few months. Boris Johnson and Prince Charles, God knows what happened in the Evening Times. Did Charles go for a walk and talk to the palm trees? Did Boris lie back and think of England? Let me start with that. Many people, including the New York Times, that ran a story that the British media did not run, which disappeared between the first and second editions of the London Times a couple of weeks ago. The proximate reason for the article was that it had been revealed that Boris Johnson had been trying to get a £100,000 a year job for his now wife, then mistress, Carrie Johnson. Now, I forget her maiden name, but that's what she was known by at the time. He was trying to shoehorn her in, if you get my pun, to a job in the Foreign Office with the pay of £100,000. The Mandarins were having none of it and told the then Foreign Secretary that, in fact, she had no qualifications for a job of that importance. At round about the same time, that'll be the same time that the actual Mrs. Johnson was receiving cancer treatment while still married and living with the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. You'll have to pay close attention here because it gets lurid and complicated by the minute. A member of Parliament walked in on Boris Johnson in a compromising situation. That's what it said in the London Times, but only in the first edition. By the time of the second edition, not 2 hours later, Johnson's people had phoned Rupert Murdoch's people and had the story pulled off the presses. And therefore, the vast majority, even of readers of the London Times, knew nothing of this story. Only the lucky readers of the New York Times knew anything about it. What was that compromising situation? Was it Tony Hancock snug underneath the CCTV cameras? No. It was much wilder than that. It was the Foreign Secretary lying back on the sofa past the sick bag Alice, whilst the now Mrs. Johnson, then Carrie, whatever her maiden name was, on her knees performing an oral sex act on the Foreign Secretary in Parliament, in your time, on your dime. at the very time he was trying to get that same person a £100,000 a year job in the Foreign Office. This, by the way, after we now know he had spent more than £100,000 of taxpayers' money whilst Mayor of London on another blonde floozy that he was banging, although that was for pole dancing classes or whatever business it was she was trying to get off the ground. You see a pattern here: public money, floozies, betrayal, adultery, debauchery. You see the Prime Minister we have. Now, that Member of Parliament didn't knock. Although you would have thought somebody who was the Foreign Secretary might have locked his door before lying back and thinking of the Empire as the Foreign Secretary getting a blowjob. But no, he did not. The Member of Parliament came in and saw wine. So there was wine taken in the middle of the day, just before the blowjob. I suppose Carrie needed it to fortify her for her task. Who was that Member of Parliament? Well, now we know. Don't mention your name, Pike. The unlikeliest promoted cabinet minister, one portfolio after another, and the unlikeliest knight of the realm. Ah, that's right, Pike. Sir Pike, Sir Gavin Williamson. Now we know what he got the knighthood for, that ancient, old English virtue of discretion. Because, of course, Sir Gavin, as he now is, could have blown the Prime Minister's political career right there and then. He could have marched to the lobby, summoned the press, and informed them what he had just experienced, and then gone off for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder counseling, because, as Vladimir Putin put it just the other day, the sight of Boris Johnson undressed, whether the top half or the bottom half, would be equally disgusting. But poor Sir Gavin braved it with the spirit of the charge of the Light Brigade. He charged on and on in the service of Boris Johnson thereafter. If it was just the Prime Minister's debauchery and his personal corruption, we might survive. If the cabinet around him were men and women of fortitude and of, I don't know, integrity, an old-fashioned word, then we might actually pull through. All these sexual double entendres just keep slipping into my discourse. They're not deliberate, I promise you. But let's turn to the Deputy Chief Whip. Pincher by name, Pincher by nature, or pinch him might have been appropriate. He has been sacked, or has fallen on his sword, after staggering around one of the London clubs. Now, by clubs, I don't mean a glitter ball. I'm not talking Peter Stringfellows. I'm talking about a London club in the gentleman's sense. And almost all those present were gentlemen, or men at least. Pincher staggered around, so drunk he couldn't speak, according to his parliamentary colleagues, whose whip he was, who reported afterwards that he had to be poured into a London taxi and could not articulate his address. They had to look up his address to tell the cabbie so that he could be taken home, but not before. He had allegedly sexually assaulted not one but two young men on the premises. These kind of things get you horsewhipped. get you put in the library with a bottle of whiskey. Well, he no longer needed that, and a pearl-handled revolver in London clubland. These are not things that you do to frighten the horses, you see. These are things best left to the private realm. Now look, I've been sexually active for more than 50 years. I've done a lot of sex. I'm not any kind of prude. But this couple of vignettes, and there are many more, sum up what's happening on the bridge of the good ship Britannia as we sail headlong onto the rocks. That's the problem, not the sex. It's what they're doing, what they are like, the kind of people that they are, that has led us to this sorry pass. Now, in 1963, Britain was in the grip of much the same kind of thing. Vice, corruption, lying, rottenness at the heart and the head of the Tory government, which for 13 long years had misruled Britain, stumbling from one disaster after another, some of them, like Suez in 56, almost destroying our entire international position. Others bringing our country into disrepute on a daily basis. The Profumo affair, although Profumo had nothing on Boris Johnson and Mr. Pincher, Profumo had an affair with a young woman, Christine Keeler, and lied about it in the House of Commons, and then spent the next decades in public service in the East End of London, paying penance for his sins. But in 1963, coming up to the general election of 1964, when Britain was ruled by the 17th Earl of Hume, one of the guilty men at Munich, one of the chief appeasers of Hitler, at least we had a functioning opposition. More than functioning, vibrant, bristling, gagging to come to power, packed full of policies. Harold Wilson, Mr. Anthony Wedgwood Benn, the author of the phrase, "the white hot heat of the technological revolution," was the crucible in which the new Britain, under Labour, let's go with Labour, they said, would be founded, formed. Labour had 10, 12 cabinet members ready to be Prime Minister on the day that Labour came to power. What is it today? I asked a friend of mine who knows the right wing of the Labour Party only too well, who's next if Keir Starmer has been fined and has to resign? Do you know what he said? It should be Wes Streeting. Wes Streeting playing the role of Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Dennis Healy, Wedgwood Benn, Richard Crossman, Richard Crossland, Barbara Castle. All of these putative prime ministers are to be imitated by somebody called Wes Streeting. Of course, my friend wasn't claiming that it would be Wes Streeting, just that it should be. He thought it would be between somebody called Lisa Nandy and Yvette Cooper and one or two others. He ruled out Andy Burnham on the obvious point that he's not an MP. I bet he regrets going off to be the mayor of Coronation Street now. That it can't be Angela Rayner because she'll have to resign also because she was at the party. Was there a party? Well, we don't know yet because Labour are keeping stum about whether or not Keir Starmer has been fined. It's very clear. We saw his lips move. We heard him say, if I'm fined, I will resign. And if he resigns, Rayner must also resign. If he gets fined, she obviously must get fined. Although she tried to pretend for a while she wasn't there, couldn't remember. Labour couldn't remember whether she was there or not, but she was there. We've got the receipts. We've got the pictures. Now, if the Durham police don't fine Keir Starmer, then why did the Metropolitan Police fine Boris Johnson? And if they do fine Keir Starmer, given his solemn and binding pledges, he's off the park. It's a red card for Keir. Sing hallelujah, except when you think it'll maybe be Wes Streeting in his stead. Well, we're going to find out this week whether Keir Starmer falls over sleaze and lies, sex, lies and videotape runs throughout the upper reaches of the British political class, and livid, raw, rude, it certainly is. And that's only what's happening in Britain. Wait till we turn to what's happening in the rest of the world. I told you, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Fasten those seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
There's the first poll of the evening. Will sleaze bring down Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter handle and you can vote on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe if you have not. I'm over 200,000 subscribers at last. Thank you to everyone of you who has subscribed. Now, if you're on YouTube, you can, of course, send us super chats to get us back on the air with the Wednesday midweek MOATS and get the podcast back up and running. Here's the telephone number to call if you want to contribute to the show. 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom, 08081 965522, or if you're in the United States or Canada. It's also toll free both countries, free, +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. Now, if there's a country in a worse state than Britain, it might be Israel. In Israel, they do have a government and they do have an opposition. The problem is they are absolutely indistinguishable one from the other, and none of them seem to be able to stay in office for very long. Luckily, standing sentinel for all the good people of Israel and all the good people of the world is the finest writer and journalist in that country, Gideon Levy of Haaretz. It's an honor always, Gideon, to have you on the show. Well, here we go again. Another election.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you, George. A great honor. And I couldn't phrase the situation better than you did. I mean, you said it all. You said it all. We are playing a masquerade in which there is opposition and coalition, and there is left and right. But by the end of the day, in Israel of 2022, there is only right and extreme right. Nothing else but this.
What's the proximate reason for the fall of the government and the calling of yet another poll?
None of the two blocs, so to say, can get a real majority. So we are now going the fifth time to the ballots, and I can almost promise you that the outcome will be very similar again. There is a problem that because they are so similar, maybe because no one of them carries anything new or any vision for change, therefore the whole system is really stuck. And when I say stuck, I mean deeply stuck. We are in a deadlock.
It's a very serious situation that a country at the epicenter of so many swirling potential conflicts with Lebanon, with Iran, with the incipient problem of millions of occupied Palestinians, is essentially ungovernable, Gideon.
It's not only this, there are also many domestic problems, and don't underestimate them, because whenever we speak about the problems of Israel, we always speak about the foreign policy and security policy, but finally Israel is also struggling also on its character, on its profile. We are dealing still with an immigration society which never decided what do they want to be, with this inherent contradiction between being democratic, so to say, and being a Jewish state, so to say. Both can never go together, and Israelis cheat themselves, lie themselves, claiming that it is possible to be both a Jewish state and a democratic state governing 5 million Palestinians under occupation.
It is, of course, the fundamental contradiction, but one name seems to be, I don't know if you're familiar with Blackpool Rock. It's a sickly confectionery product that has letters, words written all the way through it. And if Israel were a stick of Blackpool Rock, it would have the name Netanyahu running through it. The crocodile, he's still there, isn't he? And his jaws are wide open, hoping that power is going to fall back into those jaws.
Not only hoping, he carries now the best chances, because right now, as close as this is between the two blocs, still all the polls show that if there will be a clear majority, it will be on the side of Netanyahu. So he is there, all Israeli politics in the last 15 years is under his shadow, and he doesn't show any signs of disappearing, and maybe we will continue to live under his shadow. And that's one of the reasons why the system is so stuck, because he's putting his very heavy and white shadow over the political system. He is the most beloved Israeli prime minister ever and the most hated prime minister ever. And this has some consequences.
Now, the last time we spoke about him, he was facing criminal charges. And I remember we discussed if he were to succeed in the election, he might be able to kick the can down the road on those charges. What's the status of all that now?
Nothing changed, George. That's part of the problem, that we are still in the same place. The trial is still going on. I must say that at least part of the charges were not proven until now. And it seems that he will be convicted, but not for bribery. But maybe it's too early to say. But there are some cracks, there are some doubts about this trial. And we'll see how it will end. It will take another many months and maybe few years until this will be over. And meanwhile, he will do anything possible to regain power, to become again prime minister, and to try to change the rules of the game.
Now, the acting prime minister, I suppose he still is, the man who fell from power so quickly, Naftali Bennett, what's the country's verdict on his interregnum?
No, on Friday at dawn, he was replaced by Yair Lapid. So we have now a new prime minister. According to a political agreement between the two, they were partners. Yair Lapid is secular, while Naftali Bennett is Orthodox. Yair Lapid is a former TV anchor for many, many years, very popular TV anchor. And it is another challenge to see if he's capable at all to run a quite complicated country like Israel. So today he concluded his first day in office. I think it's too early to judge, but he will do his best in the coming 4 months, because the elections are in 4 months, and he stands in the front of the government, which is an interim government. It's not a permanent government until the elections. He will try to do something to impress the Israelis that he is capable of running this country. I have my doubts.
Now, the last time again that we spoke, the so-called Israeli Arabs, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, seemed to make their most significant impact in the election result. They joined the then governing bloc, made the difference, I think. They wouldn't have been able to form a government without them. Where stand they now in this great battle?
Unfortunately, the joint list, which is the list which combined all the Israeli-Palestinian parties together, split it between the Islamic Party and the secular parties. And the Islamic Party joined this government from the outside, but they are supporting the government and they are part of the coalition, which is quite sensational in the history of Israel because it never happened before. But also this is very, very fragile because they are facing a lot of attacks both by Israeli Palestinians and by Jewish nationalists. And I'm not sure that they will make it in the coming elections. Time will show. Right now, part of the Israeli Palestinians are part of the coalition, part of them are in the opposition. And as it looks now, I'm very afraid that very few Israeli Palestinians will go to the ballots in 4 months because they are quite sick and tired of promises and of their own politicians who did not deliver the goods.
Now, once upon a time, I'd have asked you what the impact of all of this has on the peace process. But you and I at least know there's no such thing as a peace process.
It's much worse than this, George, because I claim that there was never a peace process. I mean, we are dealing with the longest peace process in history, with endless peace conferences, endless peace plans, which repeat themselves one after the other. But really, after 55 years of occupation, after decades of peace process, it's really time at least to admit the truth that Israel had never an intention, a serious intention, to put an end to the occupation. It's time to realize that the occupation is not a temporary phenomena. It is there to stay. And if the occupation is not temporary, the consequence is very clear. Israel should be defined as an apartheid state. Because if it's not temporary, if it's permanent, Israel cannot be considered anymore as a democracy.
It's grim indeed. I'm sure we'll talk again before the polls, Gideon. It's an honor, as always. You're an officer and a gentleman. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Will Sleaze bring down Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer? That's the question I asked. On Twitter, yes, 53, no, 47. Quite close, actually. On YouTube, yes, 32, no, 68. Wow. And on Telegram, yes, 65, no, 35. Wildly different conclusions. Get voting. You've got another hour and a half or so to have your say. I'll take a quick break and then I'm back with the one and only Texas Rose, Rachel Blevins, who's found herself in Moscow. We'll have to find out how and why after this. Professor Richard Wolff said that there are mass shootings in the United States every other week. I didn't have the heart to tell him that in fact there are 1.63 mass shootings in the United States per day. They're not all, of course, as utterly catastrophic as the one in the Ross Primary School. These murderous weapons, which went on to kill, slaughter actually, 19 children of the same age as my own, and 2 brave teachers slain with them. A lot of people in the US want to talk about it.
I read a sobering stat that kind of puts it all into context, and that is that more children in the United States die of gunfire every year than all of the military personnel in the United States and the police combined.
The cops waited for a skeleton key to open the classroom door whilst the children were being murdered inside. I'm sure I've seen American cops kicking down people's doors. They stood waiting rather than deal with the matter themselves.
All police officers have an automatic skeleton key in their trunk, or at least it used to be that way, which was a 12-gauge shotgun which will open any lock. So yes, they could have easily gone in there and not waited for the FBI.
The United States was born a revolutionary country. It came to power through armed revolution. It knew very well to its cost what tyrannical government, in this case from London, looked and felt like, that they would at least be able to defend themselves. Now, that right to bear arms is sacred to millions of Americans.
You're there alone in the home sometime at night with the wife, the kids, and there's some bump in the night, and you feel better with everybody huddled behind a bunch of furniture, and you're there with a bead on the door. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of people. Gun sales are through the roof here.
Yes,
they're through the roof because of that. Most people aren't buying AR-15s, but the people are buying for self-defense. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't really trust the government, and they're kind of scared of their neighbors.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now make a note in your diary. The midweek mother of all talk shows will return to the airwaves the second Wednesday of October. Make a note. I don't know what time it will be. I don't know exactly how long it will last. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 90 minutes. That depends on how much funding we can raise. But it will definitely be back the second Wednesday of October. I think it's the 12th of October, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And at the same time, I hope we'll be able to bring back the podcast. Now, if you want to help fund that, make sure we're properly powered to go hit the ground running in October with the midweek MOATS, then the best way to give is on YouTube through the Super Chat mechanism, and the Super Chats are flooding in. Dino Pantalucas donated $4.99, which is his weekly contribution to the Fighting Fund. And as always, he sends us solidarity from New York. Thank you, Dino. God bless you. You're a regular star here. There's MGTOW Gem. I don't know if that's a company. I can't really call him Mr. or Ms. MGTOW Gem, but I'm very grateful that they donated Australian dollars, $7.99. Charito Hernandez donated $10 US. Steeler UK donated £5 and says, haha, George's karaoke at the start of the show was epic, worth a $5 alone. But then came the monologue with the story of BJ getting a BJ. Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Steeler. It was hard to relive what Boris Johnson and his wife and poor Gavin Williamson went through that day, but it's dark and lonely work, but somebody has to do it. Tevi Carley donates £2. Thank you very much. Pat Mikaidu, I think also £2. Yeah, £2. Devi Carley donated £2. Jason Kane, £2, and asks any news on Buka. I think the Buka canard is well and truly bankrupt, and that's why there's never any talk about it, like so many other war propaganda hoaxes in the Ukraine. Xavier Basabi donated $5 US. Thank you. David Pierce donated £2 Please keep donating. I'd keep adumbrating the generosity of the audience, but I must go to Moscow to interview Rachel Blevins that we used to talk to for so long in Washington, D.C. Let's see and hear how she's getting on. Rachel, wonderful to see you again. We've missed you so much. We'll talk about the big issues, but first of all, people will want to know what brings you to Moscow. Have you run away and married a Cossack or what?
No, not at all. I am actually here to work with RT International here in Moscow. You know, I worked with RT America for nearly 4 years before everything was shut down there in Washington, D.C. And we're kind of in an interesting political climate. And I know you know a lot about this, where everyone wants to brand you Russia state affiliated media, whether you're working directly with RT or not. And so in my case, I had the opportunity that came up to come here and actually work with RT here in Moscow. And so I decided that that's something that I would pursue. And, I think that definitely I'm at a time in my life where I'm able to take an opportunity like this, but I also think that there's a lot of value to actually coming to a country like Russia, seeing how it is, seeing what it's like and what the people are like here, because you see the coverage in the media and you see so many talking heads that sit all across the US and they give their opinions on Russia, but they're not actually here seeing what it's like and seeing how the country is. And so I'm here to kind of give my take and also to come on a new adventure that luckily gets me out of Washington, D.C.
Well, wrap up warm in the winter time, won't you? It's a cold winter in Moscow, but then it kind of is in D.C. Also. Now, you made the obvious case that I've been making throughout, that shooting the messenger, branding the messenger, labeling falsely or otherwise the messenger, closing them down, it doesn't actually materially affect the facts on the ground. But of course, for a time, it fools enough of the people enough of the time. A good case in point is last evening, where American-supplied NATO missiles rained down on civilian targets inside Russia. Now, and several people were killed and many were injured. Now, Russia will no doubt answer those missiles with missiles of their own. And I hazard a guess that those missiles will fall on the capital, Kiev. Not, I hope, on civilian targets, unlike the Ukrainian ones, but on government targets and centers of decision-making, as they say in the parlance. Western media outlets will only report the retaliation. They haven't reported last night's ballistic missiles raining down on houses in Belgorod, inside Russia. So what you do is you gain a temporary advantage in propaganda terms with your own people, but you don't change the course of the war. And the war, the tide of the war, has irrevocably turned. Is that how it looks to you from Moscow?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, this is something that anyone who was paying attention saw coming from the moment that the Biden administration started shipping over tens of billions of dollars in weapons and equipment to Ukraine. And of course, members of the Biden administration stand there and they say, oh, well, Ukraine gave us assurances that they're not going to use those weapons directly against Russia on Russian territory. But then at the same time, you also have to remember the fact that we're talking about one of the most corrupt countries in the world, where they have far-right neo-Nazi militias running rampant within their own military. So anyone who's watching this situation play out knows that it is just a matter of time until Ukraine does something like this. And I'm glad that you pointed out the media reaction on that, because it really goes to show you that not only do they have a narrative, but that they are willing to follow it no matter what happens, no matter what civilians are killed, no matter how Ukraine is acting out, and the ways in which, if it were Russia doing that, then they would have wall-to-wall coverage and they would be sending correspondents to, places in Ukraine claiming that they were on the ground and that they were giving you the full story. And instead, they just kind of gloss over it and they wait for any sort of retaliation. And then they will really start bringing the news to the people, so to speak. And I think that people are really getting sick and tired of that, right? right? We've seen certainly in the United States, and I'm sure it's the same all across Europe and the UK, where people are looking at what their government is doing. They're looking at what their media is reporting, and they're wondering, well, wait a minute, we've been sold this story that if we just gave Ukraine enough weapons, if we just pledged enough money, and we suffered on our end where we're dealing with continued inflation and sky high energy prices, if we just suffered through all that and we gave that support, then the tide would be turning, right? Then they would quote unquote beat Russia, whatever that looks like, to the West. And yet they're not seeing that happen. And so I think that it really is a big turning point that hopefully we will start to see, where people really start to wake up and they wonder why it is that these politicians that they continue to support are not serving their own countries and are instead continuing to throw money into what has truly become a bottomless pit here.
Well, I don't know what's happening in the US. I'm going to ask you to tell me, but I know what's happening in Britain. And the flags are coming down. The Ukrainian flags are coming down. I drove past a building on the way to the studio tonight that has from the beginning been flying the most gigantic Ukrainian flag, God knows where they got it, I've ever seen. But it's not there now. It's been replaced by the English flag now. It's on top of a big warehouse factory type thing. The Twibbons on Twitter, the blue and yellow ribbons that were everywhere, are disappearing like snow off a dike in the springtime. The number of people complaining about the necessary consequences of the government choices that we have made on the price of petrol and gas, shortage of foodstuffs. I don't know if you're familiar with Lurpak butter, but I can tell you it's now £7.99 a tub. I nearly dropped it when I looked at the price in the supermarket yesterday. Everyone here is paying close to £10 a gallon for petrol, diesel, £10 a gallon. And if your car takes as many gallons as mine takes, then filling your tank has gone from about £80 to about double that in the course of a few months. In America, I see that Joe Biden has changed his tune. It was all Putin's price hike before, but yesterday he attacked who? Not Putin, not the oil companies, but the mom and pop petrol station owner who's making less than 50 cents a gallon selling the petrol. Biden sternly warned them to cut their prices.
Yeah. I do not know who is advising Joe Biden at the moment, but it is kind of comical that you're right. He's spent months now calling it Putin's price hike. And then they kind of caught on to the fact that the American people weren't buying that they weren't going along with this narrative. And now he's getting on Twitter calling out the individual companies, telling them to cut their prices. And you know what's hilarious about this is that even Jeff Bezos got on Twitter and called out Biden and said that the man did not know what he's talking about. And I'm thinking, if Jeff Bezos, one of the most unpopular people in America, is getting on there and calling out Joe Biden, then that is not a good look, not at all. And so I do not know what he is doing with this strategy of his, or if there is a strategy at all, quite frankly. But it is notable that the latest poll on whether or not Biden should seek re-election found that 71% of Americans think that he should not run again in 2024. And that is a major thing right there, because you have to remember, we were told that this was the most popular presidential candidate of all time, of all history, only because he was going up against Donald Trump at the time. But that was the narrative that was sold. And just 2 years later, look how quickly it has all fallen apart, when the overwhelming majority of Americans are standing there saying, surely literally anyone could be better than this guy to run again and to handle things in this country. Because in the United States, and it is similar across Europe, where you have governments that have printed money left and right because they were dealing with historic lockdowns. And then they realized that they loved those policies, so they continued them for 2 years. So we were already dealing with drastic inflation. And then all of a sudden they decide that they want to play around with World War III and pour tons of money into Ukraine. And so those problems only continue to worsen. So yes, for as long as the Biden administration is going to sit there and try to blame everyone else other than those that are directly responsible, well, the American people are finally waking up to it.
Yes, 71% is a massive number. I'll let you in on a secret. He'll not be running anywhere. He'll not even be bicycling anywhere anymore. He might try to limp to the start line or on his Zimmer frame. I don't know if that's what you call them, the little carriage with wheels on the bottom. He might get to the starting line, but he might also be challenged in the primaries. Now, the perennial hopeful, Bernie Sanders, has already declared that he will not challenge Joe Biden in a primary election, and that he's supporting a second Biden term. So he's one of the 29% in America that want Biden to run again. Do you think if there is a primary, anyone of substance will come forward?
See, I'm curious to see what they bring up, because I, think back to 2020 when there were so many Democratic challengers, right? You had not only Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but you had a number of others that were these sort of fresh faces, and yet they were not popular. They didn't do great when it came to fundraising. And so I'm genuinely curious to see how that plays out and what the Democratic Party tries to put up there, especially when on the other side, you have the Republican Party with someone like Donald Trump, who clearly has had support and could have support again. And you've also got someone like Ron DeSantis, who has become more and more popular. And whether or not he runs, or even whether he runs as a Trump running mate, they have some powerful contenders that the American people, they've been in this place where they kind of swing back and forth with right and left, right? They decide, okay, we're going to try out this political party for a while. Now we're going to swing back to the other one. And in the case of the Democrats, we're in a situation where not only did they get the White House, they also have the House and Senate right now, and they have not delivered to the American people on their campaign promises. And that's the biggest thing, because typically when a president isn't able to do that, or a certain party in Congress isn't, they just blame the other party. Well, in this case, Democrats don't really have anyone to blame but themselves. So I think that is definitely going to be something to watch for, to see if they actually try something new, or if it's a case where they would rather just kind of take a step back a little bit, let a Republican get back in power, because then at least they have someone to really face off against to then gain more support for their own candidate. And how sad is it that in the richest country in the world, we're in a situation where one political party is literally just hoping that the other one has a candidate that's so bad that they can campaign off of that, instead of actually campaigning on policies that would help the American people.
Well, I hope I'm not breaking any British laws by wishing you all the best in your new job, Rachel. Moscow is a wonderful city, a wonderful European city. It's the biggest city in Europe. Russia is the biggest European country. It is a truly wonderful place, and I hope they're going to pay you in rubles rather than dollars, because, hey, despite all the sanctions, the ruble is king. The ruble has come out on top of the dollar, despite all the efforts. Speaking of king, did you see the Elvis movie?
I actually haven't seen it yet, and I'm close to a movie theater here that actually plays movies in English, so I'm gonna have to go by and see it. I'm looking forward to it. And you're right, it's funny, I will say one last thing is that with all of the sanctions, the average Russian is actually doing just fine. It's not really impacting their daily lives too much, but as an American coming over here, from the moment you land, all of your credit cards are cut off thanks to the US government, and all of your money is cut off unless you brought cash. So it almost forces you to have to use not only rubles, but also the systems that the Russians have set up here. So it's kind of ironic, yet another way in which the US government is shooting itself in the foot with these sanctions, and yet another way that they only seem to be impacting people from the West.
I hope they let you back in, Rachel, eventually, but I hope you have a long and wonderful stay in Russia. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Will Sleaze bring down Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, and on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Well, as is obvious by now, me and Gayatri and the kids all went to see Elvis this week. Man, what an experience it was. I was all shook up. Watch this. Elvis was the soundtrack of my life. His first record, That's All Right Mama, on the Sun label, under the direction of the legendary Sam Phillips in Memphis, Tennessee, was released in 1954. The year I was born. Don't tell the wife, she thinks I'm 45. And Elvis went and died on my birthday in 1977. For years afterwards, I had to be melancholy on my birthday because the radio was always filled with retrospectives of Elvis, although that died away, and for decades. When I was a child at primary school, I was a rank and file member of the official Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And every one of those words was on the badge. It was a long, horizontal, silver and red badge, which I wore to school every day. My aunt, Maureen, a fanatic for Elvis, presented me with an album of newspaper and magazine cuttings and every glossy photograph of the very beautiful Elvis Presley, the young Elvis, not the fat Elvis, not the Vegas years Elvis, but in the young Elvis years, there's never been a more beautiful man than Elvis Presley. Anyway, in that album, every glossy picture had been planted with the red lipstick kisses of my aunt. How I wish I still had that album now. I loved Elvis, even when it was naff to do so. And in 1968, when he bounced back from dismal years of lousy movies and Christmas specials with Christmas jumpers and log fires burning, when he bounced back in 1968, which was in a way the year that my life really started. I was only 14, but I was going on 19, if you get my drift. In that year, Elvis's comeback special, complete with all leather suit, tight leather trousers, tight leather jacket, going right back to his rock and roll roots, Elvis really rocked. I tell you, he was a knockout in 1968. And of course, I draw a veil on the Vegas years, although the reason I'm talking to you now about Elvis is I've just seen the movie Elvis by Baz Luhrmann, the director of Romeo and Juliet and Moulin Rouge, a brilliant Australian director. Indeed, much of the film was shot in Australia. It is a masterpiece.
Who the hell is that?
Elvis Presley.
But take a handkerchief with you if you go to see it, as I very much hope that you will.
There's a lot of people saying a lot of things, but in the end, you got to listen to yourself.
Elvis, as Jimmy Carter, the then United States president, said on his death at the untimely age of 42, died sitting on a toilet directly as a result of his addictions. He was officially dying of a heart attack, but in fact, he had died of a broken heart some years before, all of which is explored brilliantly in Baz's epic masterpiece of a film. But as Jimmy Carter pointed out in his statement on the death of Elvis, Elvis's importance to the musical, cultural, and political history of the United States should not be underestimated. And I myself have never underestimated it. And Baz Luhrmann's movie doesn't underestimate it at all. What do I mean? Well, not just that he made some really wonderful music, and there's a bit of a revival in the United States now in record sales for Elvis, but he is still, despite all those that have come in the years since his death, the biggest selling solo artist in the history of music. And that is something to be when you think of the competition that there has been. What did Carter mean by his statement? What do I mean by talking about Elvis on the mother of all talk shows? Well, the reason Elvis was such an explosive success was that although white, he was kind of a black man. He came from the wrong side of the tracks. His family were, how shall I put it, white trash, trailer trash. They could not afford to live with white people. Elvis's father had been sent to prison. His mother was a drunk and a lush who never recovered from the loss of Elvis's twin brother when he was a baby. So they lived actually in the shacks with the black people. And that's what made Elvis great, because unlike virtually every other white person in the late 1940s, early 1950s, Elvis was rubbing shoulders with black people all the time. He was listening and learning their music, their songs. That's All Right Mama, Lordy Miss Claudie, Train, Train. Virtually every track on Elvis's Sun recordings are black songs. And when he burst on the scene in the year of my birth, 1954, nobody could believe that this was a white guy singing. Everybody believed that he was black. And that's before they saw him move. When he was unwisely booked for a country and western traveling show by a man called Colonel Tom Parker, although he wasn't actually a colonel, and he was not called Tom Parker. But I don't want to spoil the movie for you. When he was booked for that show, and he came on the stage after a succession of sickly, hillbilly, country and western troubadour crooners, he burst on the scene already a legend. He exploded with Elvis the Pelvis, movement that could only have come from his own black roots. He was actually of mixed race, Native American mixed race, although that had been covered up for a long time in his family history. But he was part Cherokee, which is why he had such very, very fine cheekbones. But when Elvis was on the stage in the 1950s, well, you'd have to know what music was like in the 1950s before Elvis, in the era BE, or should I say white music was like before Elvis. You'd have to know what it was like to fully appreciate the revolutionary transformation that this young man, this truck driver from Tupelo, Mississippi, what a revolutionary impact Elvis made. And it was his bad luck that that very period was the period of peak paranoia of white racism in the southern states of the United States, in Alabama, in Tennessee, in Mississippi, in Texas. They could not bear the idea of race mixing. They could not bear the idea of miscegenation of black people and white people marrying, having children together, having relationships with each other. This was the end of times for them. So suddenly this Elvis is on the stage And he is the very embodiment of the race mixing that they were terrified of. And it got so hot for Elvis that they threatened him. It's either the draft and sent to Germany as a clean-cut, all-American GI, as part of the American occupation force in Germany, or it's jail. They really were going to put him in jail. They were going to ban him from television. They were going to ban him from respectable musical venues. He might never have had a stage or a screen to perform on ever again. Colonel Tom Parker, brilliantly played by Tom Hanks. I'm not a fan personally of Tom Hanks, but he is one hell of an actor. And playing Colonel Tom Parker, he puts in one hell of a performance. But nothing can touch Austin Butler as Elvis. He looks like him. He sounds like him. He moves like him. He is Elvis for the duration of this movie. I better not say any more, or I'll be spoiling the movie for you. But as far as Rotten Tomatoes, you say tomatoes, I say tomatoes, but don't call the whole thing off. As far as Rotten Tomatoes go, I give it 5 out of 5. I give it 10 out of 10. I give it A+. Please go and see Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. But do take a handkerchief.
Been a lot of talk about the new Elvis. Those people ain't gonna change me none.
Take my word for it. Now, some somber news. Several people have been killed in a shooting in Copenhagen in a shopping mall. One person has been arrested. One person, a 22-year-old ethnic Dane, that's just for the avoidance of doubt, has been arrested in connection with the shooting, according to the authorities. Several people have been killed. One person has been arrested in connection with the shootings. Copenhagen police described the perpetrator as a 22-year-old ethnically Danish man. Police say they're not ruling out the possibility that the incident at the Fields shopping centre, one of the largest in all of Scandinavia, was terror-related. My goodness. Dramatic news. We'll keep you up to date with it. More super chats coming in. Alan Everest donated $10 US. Many thanks to you, Alan. Robert P. donated 10 British pounds. That's even more generous. And says, how do we get our elected officials to stop getting drunk in private clubs and instead sit down and negotiate the end of war, end of NATO, end of the looming energy and food crisis? Well, there's far too much alcohol drunk, not as much as there was when I was in Parliament for nearly 30 years, so they say. Maybe it's done off-site, but not quite as much as before. But then there's people taking drugs as well as drinking, and that certainly was a very rare thing when I was a member of Parliament. The MPs are the only workers in the country that are permitted to drink on the job and can get drunk on the job, and are drinking alcohol that is publicly subsidized. 1970s prices, life on Mars prices. I never set foot ever in a single one of the 19 bars in the British Parliament, and I campaigned for their closure. That's why they used to describe me as a lone wolf and say I was unpopular and so on. But I took the very simple view that first of all, people should not be drinking at work. And when I saw what they did when they were drunk, I knew that no good could come of it. Tomas donated €5. Thanks, Tomas. How's your court case against Twitter going in Dublin? Very good. And I've already published my terms, and Elon Musk knows what they are. Albert Sontag donated a whopping $35. Says, with good wishes, George, from a faithful follower in California. Albert, God bless you. And James O'Callaghan donated £5, says, keep up the fight, George. Hail, hail. This is the traditional greetings between one Celtic supporter and another. Thanks, James. Andrew donated £5 and said, the real left would be lost without good man. If you mean me, Andrew, I'm touched and grateful. Jason Stewart donated £4.49, says, dear George, Elvis was the king of rock and roll. You are the king of sound integrity. Thank you for bringing the mother of all talk shows into our living rooms. Thank you, Jason. Very beautiful words. Maui Bill donated $5 and says, aloha from Maui. Keep up the good fight, George. I must come and visit you in Maui. It might be fun. Now, my next guest was the Elvis of British journalism, by far the coolest and most handsome journalist that I ever met. He's a fellow Scotsman, though he's been living and working in London for a very long time and has retired from the newspaper game, where he made his name, amongst many other things, as a forensic investigator in print of the, how shall I put it, shortcomings of the Metropolitan Police and indeed of other police forces. He's gone on to become a very successful crime writer. I haven't seen him for some years, and I'm very happy to do so now. His name is Duncan Campbell. Duncan, welcome to the show, and I hope and I can see from the glow on your face you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. The proximate reason for inviting you this evening, and thanks for accepting, is that the Metropolitan Police, led by its effectively Crime Commissioner, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, are now in special measures. That's quite serious, isn't it?
It is very serious, and there are very good reasons why it is in this position. I like to try and explain what special measures means, because I think it's one of those expressions, a bit like fit for purpose or institutionally corrupt, that I think people are a little uncertain about. It basically means that things have gone from bad to worse there over the last few years, and they are now in limbo to a certain extent in the Metropolitan Police. The previous commissioner, Cressida Dick, resigned in February, and we're now in July. We're still not expected to get a new commissioner until next month at the earliest. They're down to the last two candidates for the job. But it is a mess, and it's not just the Met. The Met gets all the attention because London, as you know, George, is where all the journalists are. But there are at least three other forces in the police in Britain under special measures, as they call it. And so it is a problem that is affecting all of the police in this country.
Now, many cynics blame Cressida Dick. They say that she got the gig not because she was the best police officer in London. She got it despite being in charge of the murderous killing of Jean-Charles de Menezes, the Brazilian electrician, shot by mistake in the London Underground. But actually, the men that came before her weren't up to much either, were they?
No, there's been a lot of bad leadership of the Metropolitan Police for many years. I often refer to, I think, probably the most successful Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, who was Sir Robert Mark, who, if you remember, you're just old enough to remember, George, came in 1970, in the 1970s, at a time when Scotland Yard particularly was fantastically corrupt. And he came in, he said his aim was to arrest more criminals than he employed. And he got about 50 of his officers, detectives who were deeply corrupt, were prosecuted. Another 300 left rather than face disciplinary procedures. And he made a real effort. He encouraged the police to talk to the press, which is something we can maybe come on to later, which they hadn't been before. They were very, very reticent about talking to the police. And he kind of embodied what Sir Robert Peel, who founded the Metropolitan Police in 1829, is often quoted, whether he actually said it or not, it doesn't really matter, but it's attributed to him, which is the police are the public and the public are the police. In a way, you get the kind of police force that you deserve. But I think the feeling has been over the last few years that we don't deserve some of the things that have happened. The most obvious being this horrible murder by a serving police officer, Wayne Couzens, of Sarah Everard, problems that arose in demonstrations following that, but also some very, very badly bungled murder investigations and bungled sex offense investigations in which completely innocent people were named and investigated and so on. So it's been a long time coming, but things are very serious now. And there are a lot of reasons. And I think my argument about it is that yes, the Met is in a mess, but there are a number of reasons for it, and the government is very happy to let the Met take the heat for a lot of the mistakes that they've made. When Theresa May was Home Secretary and then Prime Minister, she cut the number of officers by more than 20,000. She cut the number of staff, support staff, by 23,000. And also, half the police stations in Britain have been closed over the last 10 years. More than 600 of them. And that's one way that the police establish a relationship with the public. There's a place, it's kind of like the death of the pub and the death of the church and the death of the post office in this country. The government has been frantically selling off the family silver, and they've got rid of half of the magistrates' courts in England and Wales, sold off one round the corner from me here in Bethnal Green, is now an extremely expensive hotel. You can stay there for 300 quid a night. Used to be a magistrate's court where I used to go and see naughty people being ticked off by a magistrate. So the government have not given the police the kind of backing they deserve, or the leadership, and they have made a mess of the criminal justice system in this country.
We could talk all night about what you have just said. It was a tour de horizon without peer, actually. It identified just about every single issue that has arisen, not just in Cressida Dick's time, but going back decades. Let's take just one of them. I passed a very chic cafe, which is called the Old Police Box.
Yeah.
I'm so old, I remember, no, never mind police stations, but police boxes. So there was a station, but there was also a box. And there were pairs of police officers who would walk around the housing estate, housing scheme that I grew up on, would be looking for evidence of criminality, of course, but their very presence was intended to be a deterrence to gangs, to people up to no good. And they would repair to their police box. You could go to the police box and talk to them. Many did. There was a phone in the police box at a time when hardly any of us had phones, and you could just pick it up and you were through to the station. The station was local. People had a relationship to the police that they simply don't have now. So if Robert Peel was right, and that the public are the police and the police are the public, that is well and truly severed now, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I've kind of expected, because you know where I live, which is very near Hackney Road in East London. I'm sort of anticipating that you will hear a sound of the police at some stage with a siren going past. And that is most people's experience, is a blue flashing light and a siren. I can't think the last time I actually saw one in uniform wandering around. They used to be mocked, bobbies in bicycles 2x2 and so on like that. And, although this is created as a sort of magical time, you have to remember at that particular time in the 60s and 70s, they were fantastically, the detective branch were fantastically corrupt. One former commissioner who I knew remained in uniform all his career, and he said that it was so difficult to be a detective without having, on your first job, somebody tucking some pound notes in your top pocket from a raid or from a bribe or whatever. So while the police were on the street and people felt secure, that was going on in the background. But now we have a situation, there is not that institutional corruption within the detectives anymore. Detectives are now subject to much stricter controls than they ever were when I first started writing about them in the 70s. But what has happened is that the police have been completely detached. And as I mentioned earlier, the closure of all these police stations, like the closure of banks and everything else we're talking about, detaches people from them. And so the only form of communication is by a phone or an email or Twitter or whatever. And that, and I think whoever it becomes the new commissioner, that's one issue that they have to address. On the other hand, just to put it in a tiny bit of context, I was looking this up before I came on. At least we don't have a trigger-happy police force. I was looking at the number of fatalities caused on civilians by the police in this country. For this year, it's 0. In America, it's 497. Last year in this country, it was 1. In America, it was up 1,055 people shot dead by police officers. So we have to balance that at least we have the least trigger-happy police in the world, but we now have an extremely embattled police, both the Metropolitan Police and others, and I do believe that they've been very badly let down by, and in other ways by the government, in that the police, particularly during COVID, were left with the business of clearing up all of other society's errors. The poverty, the homeless people, the police are meant to deal with them. The alcoholics, the drug addicts that you see on the street, particularly not far from here, that's lumbered with the police. Instead of a government that is dealing with all of these problems, they're leaving it to them. And you see Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, and Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, occasionally dressing up in police uniforms. It's bizarre. It's like two children at a fancy dress party going along if there's a big drugs raid or something like that, but doing nothing to address the fact that Britain has the largest number of people in prison per head of population of any other country in Western Europe. And that creates the problems for the police. They come out, they have nowhere to go, and you have our prisons, many of them privatized, are kind of the universities for crime. They're producing more and more criminals. There is none of that rehabilitative stuff, which you will remember from the special unit in Barlini that produced great artists and none of that is going on. The prisons are so full so overcrowded that none of the education, none of the training for work that should go on, and it's the police that are left to deal with those problems when they come out of prison.
Very well said. Now, you moved on from reporting on all these things to fictionalize them. And a very fine crime writer you turned out to be. When you watch these crime series on television, Line of Duty and so on, how close to reality do you think that is?
Well, I like Line of Duty, but I mean, the idea that undercover officers, you'd have an undercover officer kind of spying on other undercover officers in the same police station is ludicrous. But, that's fiction. I mean, funnily enough, I've just been there is an inquiry into undercover policing going on in London at the moment. It's been going on, it's cost £50 million so far. It's been going on for a number of years. And I went along last month because giving evidence was somebody called Detective Sergeant Roy Creamer, who I remember when I worked at Time Out magazine, raided Time Out. We had a picture of him inside. He's now 93, and he was giving evidence about how the police infiltrated the left in the late 60s, early 70s. You would have enjoyed it. And he went through the different, everything from the International Marxist Group to the anti-Vietnam War campaign to Socialist Workers' Party and everything. How the anarchists, of course, because he was talking about Stuart Christie, the late anarchist and an old friend of mine who was jailed in Spain for trying to assassinate General Franco. But he was describing all of that and the police infiltrating all these different left-wing groups, coming up with absolutely nothing dangerous. Nobody was planting bombs. Nobody was doing anything particularly dangerous. They were having rowdy campaigns and so on. And so it was interesting to see that you had all of that amount of effort being put into infiltrating the left, as it were. But at the same time, that was the time when the British National Party and Combat 18 and so all the different right-wing groups were gathering, but they were all concentrating on the anarchists and the Marxists anyway. So that was an example of fantastic amount of wasted time and effort. You would have enjoyed it.
I hope you and I are still spilling beans at 93. Duncan Campbell, as I say, this could go on all night. I wish it could. We'll need to do a special. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Will Sleaze bring down Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer? A, yes, 52%, no, 48%. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 62%, no, 38%. And on Telegram, yes, 62%, no, 38%. I think on balance, both Starmer and Johnson will probably be thankful that those numbers are not very much worse. Here's the number to call if you want to have your say on what you've heard so far. Get off your chest your point of view. 08081 96 5522. If you're in the UK, it is entirely free, as it is if you're in the US or Canada. It's there, +1 844 944 3344. I'll be back very shortly. Give me a 60-second break, won't you?
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I love that jingle, I must say. He really sounds like Donald Trump. And what a payoff line, what a gag. What, thin-skinned and full of crap? Will Sleaze bring down Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer? You've got about half an hour to vote on that poll. On the Super Chat, that's your best way of donating to bring back the midweek mother of all talk shows, the second Wednesday of October. That's the launch date. Be there. You'll be on a roll of honor. Be there in the launch and be one of those that kept this show going when it might otherwise have folded. Stephen Dixon donated £1. Thank you very much, Stephen. And Sweden Tim, probably a Celtic supporter, donated Swedish krone 200. That sounds like a very handsome donation, though I have no idea what a Swedish crown is worth. It's very generous of you, Tim. And he says, NATO caught up with me after leaving the UK 40 years ago. Where next? Indeed, indeed. If I was to give you a suggestion, I'd probably be breaking the law. LZ gives US dollars 1. Thank you very much for that. Lee Hinchcliffe donates 5 British pounds and says, with best regards, keep fighting the good fight. Thank you, Lee, for that. Now, the book that I have written, it's the sequel, I passed it today. The opening sequence in Black Lake is set in an actual building in West Bromwich. And I drove past it this very evening on my way to the studio. Black Lake is the second in a series of novels. You never thought of me as a novelist, did you? First one was Queensway. This one is Black Lake. The next one is Annandale Water, but that is some way off. Black Lake takes forward the story, developed first in Queensway, of what would have happened if Hitler had made it into Parliament Square, if Hitler had crossed the Channel, if Britain had been at least in part conquered. Who would have collaborated? Plenty of them. Who would have resisted? Plenty of those too. And not just the usual suspects. I really think that you'll like it. In any case, it's the best value deal you're going to find in the book trade. Both Queensway and Black Lake for £8.99 plus postage. They're going like hotcakes, I must say. So get your order in. Now, we don't know if Keir Starmer has been fined. We don't know if he has been fined, whether he'll be true to his word and resign. But if he is fined and he does resign, there's going to be a Donnybrook inside the Labour Party. And who better to talk us through it than a former Labour official, Kevin Marr, coming up next. But let's take a couple of calls. Sarkar is in Glasgow. Always a pleasure, my friend. What would you like to say?
George, thank you so much for having me on the show. George, first of all, amazing show you guys always do. Every day I cannot watch live, but had you been into football, I would have taken all your predictions because every time, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, you've always got it right. Had you been into football prediction?
Yeah, and I've got a football podcast that I do with my good friend, who, by the way, was in a play recently with Austin Butler, who is now Elvis. So I was saying to Simon, look, today you're in a Common or Garden series on Netflix, but one day you could be Elvis too. He and I do a football podcast, which is called George's Best Football Podcast. Try it, you'll like it. It's on YouTube. Anyway,
Definitely,
Sarkar,
George.
go ahead.
Thanks so much.
Go ahead, sir.
George, by the way, amazing show. My question is more about pertinent to what's happening within the boundaries of the UK.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. SNP are looking to go for a referendum sometime in September or October next year. They've put the mandate to the Supreme Court, and assuming the Supreme Court does not allow it, today I read somewhere Angus Robertson, or one of them, said that then the next general election, they'll put this as a manifesto to say that this is their modus operandi and that's how they will proceed further. Do these people not realize Scotland makes the maximum benefit from the Barnett formula in comparison to Wales and Northern Ireland? Do these people not realize that if they separate from the UK, if they want to mollycoddle with the EU, literally EU, we all know how well their system is being run. So they want to go away from the UK, their biggest trading partner, to join the EU. I mean, has dealing with pronouns and gender obsession made them so mad that they don't deal with common sense nowadays?
Well, I'll tell you what, Sarkar, I refer you to the little 10-minute doc that I did. Again, you'll find it on YouTube, called Independence on the Rocks. I did it from the rocks of Edinburgh Castle. I laid out my stall then, but you're right. This week they put a date on it for their so-called independence referendum. And anybody who thinks the Supreme Court are going to permit that, I've got a bridge here in London that I could sell them. There is zero possibility of the Supreme Court agreeing to that because it is very clearly out with the powers of the Scottish Parliament and the so-called Scottish Government. This is a devolved system that we have, and the power devolved is power retained. The power lies at Westminster, that Scotland sends a very large number of SNP MPs to, and they get into all sorts of trouble, unfortunately, and always have, going back to the 1970s. London corrupts them, absolutely. So the court will refuse, and at least they're now backing down from their earlier cockamamie scheme of holding an illegal referendum if the court turns them down. Because we would have campaigned for an active boycott of their pretendy referendum. Every single person who didn't vote would therefore be counted as a no vote, as in our camp. And the officials, the polling clerks and polling stations in schools and so on, all of that would have been beyond their reach because officials would be breaking the law if they participated in what was an expensive farce. So they back down from that and they say they're going to turn the general election into a referendum. But this is all smoke and mirrors. First of all, a general election is not a referendum. It is electing a government that will determine all of the important aspects of your life over the next 5 years. So it's very hard to convince people to make that a one-issue gig. But even if they did, even if they bought the SNP prospectus, and at least 55% of the public, and that excludes don't knows. If you include the don't knows, then my side of the fence, the anti-separatist side, we win by 60 to 40. But if you exclude the don't knows, the clear majority of people, almost exactly the same majority that we had in 2014, do not want to break up the country. And at a time like this, breaking up the country is the last thing that most Scottish people want to see. Sarkar, thanks very much for your question and for joining us. The Labour Party may be about to plunge into a new round of leadership elections. Kevin Marr, our good friend, and authority, by the way, on Irish matters, author of a very fine book on Irish politics about why Irish unity is inevitable, is a former Labour official in Parliament, in the corridors of power. He knows all the runners and riders, and he knows a few of the skeletons in the cupboards also. Kevin Marr joins me now. Kevin, welcome back to the show. Now
Hi George, nice to see you.
And you're looking great. We don't know if Keir Starmer has been fined, but we do know that he said that if he was fined, he would quit. Now there's an ominous silence coming from the centre of Labour as to whether he has been fined or expects to be in the next days. My instinct is that that would happen during the week, not over the weekend. In any case, and the police have taken the precaution of confirming that witnesses to the events in Durham are prepared to give evidence in court if necessary. And of course, that would only be necessary if Starmer and presumably Rayner refused to accept the fixed penalty notice. What can you tell us about the Durham brouhaha first and foremost?
Well, it's high stakes stuff, isn't it? Keir Starmer, about 6 weeks ago, as you say, confirmed that if he's given a fixed penalty notice for an alleged infraction of the COVID lockdown rules when he was on a campaign visit up in the northeast of England in County Durham in 2020, if he's found guilty and given a fixed penalty notice, then he'll resign as leader of the Labour Party. I mean, that's a pretty stark position. And I think there's two interesting aspects. One is that I think he's trying to juxtapose himself with Boris Johnson, who is obviously I think it's fair to say, a fairly louche character as regards these matters, and obviously presided over a culture in number 10 of lots of parties during lockdown in flagrant breach of the rules that he, of course, as Prime Minister, was insisting the rest of us obey. So I think Keir Starmer is very keen to kind of juxtapose himself personally with Boris Johnson. And of course, Keir Starmer is, in his previous life, Director of Public Prosecutions. So as the legal system's chief advocate for the prosecution, feels that he can't really do anything else, I suspect. So this is high stakes stuff. Keir Starmer is a very cautious man, and his leadership of the Labour Party has been very cautious over the last couple of years, too cautious for many people's tastes. But this is a pretty high wire move that he announced. I think a lot of people didn't think he would do it, but he has done it. I think he probably feels a little bit that it cuts him to the quick as a character, that, as I say, as the chief prosecutor, that if he is found guilty of an infraction of COVID rules, that it would be massively personally embarrassing to him, I think. So I think he's prepared to push all the chips out on the table and take a gamble on this one, on the basis that he feels that he hasn't broken the COVID rules, that he can show that that he may have had a beer and he may have had a curry with some of his colleagues, but he went and did some other work afterwards. So it was classed as a work event. Rather than a party, which is obviously slightly the reverse of what was happening in Downing Street, where I think it was pretty clear there were parties. So I think he feels that he's not in breach of the rules, and that if he stakes everything on that basis, that if he's cleared, that they'll get quite a political boost from it. But of course, the quid pro quo is if he is given a fixed penalty notice, then he's toast. He's put himself in the toaster. He's pressed the button down in that respect. So this is high wire stuff, and we're going to find out in the next week or so. I mean, it's just one of the perverse situations, George. I mean, you'll know far better than I, but I can't remember a situation where both the Prime Minister of the day and the leader of the opposition of the day may both be gone by the end of the summer. It's as stark as that.
No, it is unprecedented. I said so in my opening remarks. The problem, and thanks for that summary, it was perfect. The problem with Keir Starmer's side of that summary is, you called them louche, I called them debauched. The problem for Starmer is that everybody, that's already baked in, that's already in the price of Boris Johnson. People expect him to be doing debauched things, and they knew that when they elected him, both as the leader of the Conservative Party and then as the Prime Minister of Britain. Both sets of electors knew that, and so nobody is surprised about the behaviour of Boris Johnson. And it doesn't seem to have harmed him all that much in his rise through politics. The second problem is Keir Starmer is already in trouble as a lackluster, overcautious, uncharismatic, and quite schismatic, as it's turned out, leader of the opposition. This is the man that has kicked out his predecessor, in whose shadow cabinet he was happy to sit in a variety of forms, of positions. So, in a way, there are many Labour people kind of hoping that the Durham Constabulary do the job for them and precipitate a Labour leadership election, don't you think?
I think it's always fascinating in the kind of Labour politics and the Labour tribe that there's no people tend not to wait for vacancies. They tend to be on manoeuvres early, and that's clearly what's happening even at this point with Keir Starmer. There are various pretenders to the throne already organising very subtly, or perhaps not too subtly, campaigns and campaign machines ready for a potential leadership election. If he goes, I mean, it's one of those situations where, as I say, Starmer's been very cautious, and I think he temperamentally is a very cautious man. Perhaps that's a part of the course with having the career that he's had in the law. But as I say, he's put it all out there on this decision. There is no wiggle room. You either get a fixed penalty notice or he doesn't, and if he does, then he goes or he doesn't go. It's as simple as that. And there is no way, I think, of trying to subtly recontextualize the announcement that he made. I thought the announcement that he made when he made it was probably, in many respects, his finest moment of the last couple of years. Anyway, I think he genuinely, had some emotion there, and there was some consequence there. Now, that's not been the hallmark of the rest of his leadership, I think it's fair to say. But on this issue, he's put it out there, and he will either be proven right in his legal judgment that he's done nothing wrong, and that the Durham Constabulary do not give him a fixed penalty notice, or if they do, he's got to go, and it's as simple as that. And his deputy, Angela Rayner, who was there as well on this occasion, she'll have to go as well, which is a massive vacuum to leave at the top of the Labour Party when we're probably 2 years away from an election. And of course, the paradox here is that, for all Boris Johnson's sort of peccadillos and failures of character, and as well as politics and of character, that he, for now at least, has managed to tiptoe past the Partygate scandal of all the kind of the culture that he presided over in Downing Street during lockdown. He's managed to get past it. Now, 40% of his MPs, a few weeks ago, obviously voted against him in a vote of no confidence. That's pretty significant. But 60% didn't. He lives to fight another day, and we're probably 3 or 4 weeks away from the summer recess when kind of Westminster, of course, goes into its kind of summer abeyance, and we're waiting for the party conference season. So Boris Johnson, paradoxically, having been banged to rights about parties and received a fixed penalty notice himself, as many of his colleagues did as well, manages to survive this squall, and Keir Starmer potentially doesn't. I mean, that would be, I think, quite a paradoxical situation. But as I say, we could end up with a situation perfectly plausibly where the leader of the Labour Party and the opposition, and the leader of the Conservatives and the Prime Minister of the day, are both gone by the autumn. I mean, that's the stakes at the moment.
Indeed. I was drawing the comparison with the end of the long Conservative government. It seemed long. Of course, it's now getting on for exactly the same number of years, 13 years of Tory misrule, culminating in the 17th Earl of Hume and the stench of dereliction, corruption, personal vice, and all the rest of it. But the difference then was, Kev, Labour was a thrusting opposition. Harold Wilson was the man to take over, and he had at least 10, maybe a dozen cabinet colleagues, all of whom could plausibly have been the Prime Minister. And they had a programme. Didn't work out all that well, but their programme in 1964 sounded hell of a plausible. The white hot heat of the technological revolution, a vision of a manufacturing, modernised industrial Britain, and so on. Now we have a government falling apart and an opposition falling apart at exactly the same time.
It's incredible. It is. And I mean, you make a good comparison there. I mean, there's the period, I suppose, through the 80s and 90s, Thatcher, Major, and then culminating in the Blair victory and New Labour victory in 1997. But yes, I mean, what's more interesting probably is that comparison between the 13 years of Conservative government from 1951 to 1964, 3 Tory leaders in that period: Churchill, Eden, four, of course, Macmillan, and then Alec Douglas-Hume as well. And of course, what you got in that period was, something that Disraeli called the temper of the times. That you ended up with a Conservative government that was burnt out in terms of its programme, but it was burnt out in terms of its moral authority as well, beset by all kinds of scandals, intelligence scandals, sex scandals, financial scandals, and all the rest of it. And there you had Harold Wilson and Labour personifying a new age, a much more meritocratic and a northern accented economist in Harold Wilson, very, very intelligent man, youngest cabinet minister of the 20th century, of course. But they personified a new age and a new time. And the difficulty at the moment is we're not at that point. I'm reminded of the remark of Wilson's successor, Jim Callaghan, of course, who was obviously his chancellor in 1964. Went on to become prime minister in the late 70s, when again there was a sense of kind of drift and decay and a government falling apart. And of course he remarked that a sea change. He was an old mariner himself, of course, and remarked that there was a sea change taking place in British politics, which of course brought Margaret Thatcher to power in May 1979. And it's a great phrase, this sense of a sea change. It's something that's inexorable and elemental, and you can't do very much about it. And what he was saying was, look, actually, the kind of social democratic program of the previous 20 years or so is kind of, the flaws and the failings of it are now quite apparent, and we've not got plan B, and the public is looking for something else and is determined to move to something else, and they obviously went for Margaret Thatcher from that point onwards. What's not happening at the moment is that a sea change is not taking place in British politics. I think everybody's pretty clear about that. As you say, you've got Boris Johnson, who is this extraordinary figure. Alan Duncan, the Conservative MP who served as one of his junior ministers at the Foreign Office, brilliantly encapsulated him as Berlusconi. He's got all the kind of characteristics of Silvio Berlusconi, or one of these kind of, Peronist South American figures, really, Boris Johnson, that people vote for him, despite all the flaws, despite all the limitations of him. He can still command the support of the British public. And you look at the polling, even in the last few days, it's not radically changing. This is not a government that's collapsing. Boris Johnson's premiership may end up going, but the Tories may end up replacing him, and they may end up winning the next election on that basis, which is, of course, what happened in the early 90s when Margaret Thatcher went and John Major took over. The public take a view, well, actually, we've had enough of her, but he seems like a nice chap, let's give him a go. And the danger for Labour is you end up in that period where people have eventually had enough of Boris and the shenanigans, to put it mildly, that follow him around everywhere. He can't seem to shake any of this loose, and they opt for somebody who has a very different tone and style. And then the public say, well, actually, we can keep with the Tories because effectively we've got a new government anyway, which is slightly the trick Boris himself pulled off by, of course, replacing Theresa May and the David Cameron era. I mean, people forget the Tories have been in power for 12 years. Boris is the third prime minister. He's the third iteration of a Tory, austerity Tory government, really. But each time it kind of re-energizes when you change the leader. And I think Tory MPs will be looking at that model and saying, let's let Boris burn himself out, and then we'll replace him. And we're at that very, very useful point, about 18 months away from a general election, and potentially we have a new leader, a new prime minister, and people say, well, let's see what they can do. And that's the big challenge for Labour, is in some respects they want Boris to stay, frankly, because by the time of the next election he may well be a big negative for them. But the polls are not showing that right now, and that sea change in British politics has not happened yet. It may happen, it may change. Boris may be a one-trick pony. He can't sort of shake off all the scandals. We've got an economy that's in the doldrums, 10% inflation, rising interest rates, teetering on the brink of recession, lots of problems in the system, big energy price rises in the autumn. Boris as a kind of as a avuncular figure that people find amusing as much as anything else. Well, you perhaps won't find him amusing when you get your heating bill in the autumn, and that's the point where he becomes a kind of an unserious man for very serious times, and that may be the point where the Tories change him. But if they do, that isn't necessarily the end of the Tories.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Kevin, in a word, 2 words, 5, 10 words. If not Starmer, who? Who will be the next leader of the Labour Party?
I think that the Labour Party has never had a woman leader in its 114-year history. There was a sense last time around that there probably should be a movement to get a woman elected. The Tories, of course, have had 2 women prime ministers in this time. I think the smart money would probably be on Lisa Nandy.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows, Kevin Marr, a man who knows his onions. Second polls out. Was Elvis the king? A, yes. B, no. Now, Gayatri is on the line with some social media news. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Let me start off with the first poll, which was about the sleaze in Parliament. Alex J says they both work for USA interest and this proxy war in Ukraine. They have created a world crisis to starve humans and make their oligarch friends richer. They should be going in jail for crimes against humanity. And I Blinky says, prurience aside, the real issues are the 100K pound job and pulling the story from the Times. And D79/300 says, the whole UK system is corrupted, there's no proper democracy in place, and only a revolution can basically reset the system. And then he adds, I would happily have Mr. George Galloway as a fresh start, a straight-talking, well-educated, grounded leader who can actually relate and listen to the ordinary man and woman on the street. How about that?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very kind, very kind. Is the social media busy? Where is it mostly coming in? Is it mainly on YouTube nowadays?
Your Elvis clip and now the poll that's running. King Elvis says, Elvis was his own man. He took as much or more from Dean Martin as blacks. And Jerry Jacobs, this is interesting, he says, I'm the same age as George, but I never liked Elvis. Now George has made me see him in a different light. So that's very good. Hope you will see the movie. And finally, Robert Cox says, Elvis, 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 I'm leaving, George. This is sick patronizing garbage about USA entertainment for morons. You are doing propaganda, George.
Elvis has left the building, and so has our correspondent.
A bit off topic, but David asks, please, George, could you tell the people about the Bretton Woods Agreement? I understand it will finish tomorrow. I think not many people know about this.
It's a long story. Maybe we'll cover it in the show next week. But the Bretton Woods settlement at the end of the Second World War is the financial framework, if you like, that Western capitalist countries have operated for all of that time. And indeed, its time has run out. And it's actually not a coincidence that its time is running out with the hegemony of the dollar, the US dollar. Sorry, mate, it's not anti-Americanism. Listen, mate, I've actually got tons of American relatives, many of whom are watching this show now, some of whom hate me because of my politics. I'm the great-great-great-grandson of the only person in Scotland who emigrated from America to Dundee when thousands were sailing in the opposite direction. I don't hate America or Americans, but there are some facts that Winnie ding that will not change. And one of those facts is that the Bretton Woods hegemony of the US dollar is coming to a close, and that the United States domination of the world, with its double whammy of the dollar and the bomb, are coming to an end, because other people have got currencies and economies that are even stronger than the United States, and they've got bombs by the dozen of thousands. Gayatri, thanks very much for that social media roundup. Must say it looks lovely where she is. Now, let's take a call from Greta in Guatemala. Maybe the first Guatemalan call we've ever had. Greta, welcome.
Hello, George. Thank you very much. I am very excited to talk to you.
Go ahead,
I'm a big
Greta.
fan of your show. Okay.
Thank you.
This is regarding Elvis. And I am 10 years your senior, George. So
well,
I
you
don't know exactly.
you sound like a spring chicken, Greta.
Well, I wish I was, but this is the way life goes. But anyway, I have a story that I have in my mind since I don't know how old I was, maybe 12 years old. He was early in Elvis Presley's career. And you're younger than me. I don't think that you were even born when this happened. But when Elvis came up, as I live in Guatemala, but I'm born, raised, and educated in Sweden. And side by side of Elvis Presley was a British or English also singer that was called Tommy Steele. I don't know if you know about him.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Okay. And I was a favorite much more of Tommy Steele than Elvis Presley. At the time, I was attending a girls' school in a small town in Sweden. And we had a discussion among the girls not in the class, but outside of the class about these two singers. So I said, and the majority there, or I think I was the only one that was favoring Tommy Steele over Elvis Presley, and I was happy to stand up for my beliefs and my thoughts. I'm still kind of like that. I don't go with the crowds necessarily if I don't.
Oh, what a pity Greta's been cut off. What a wonderful story. Once upon a time there was a black and white bull. That was Tommy Steele. Didn't he do something about sixpence? Oh, for sixpence. He was a cheeky cockney chappie. But he weren't no Elvis, that's for sure. Now, Malik Doucouré is the Minister for African Propaganda, it says here. He's a writer and commentator, and I very much want to talk Africa with him. Malik, thanks very much for joining us. Tell us, who's Minister for African Propaganda are you? What does that title mean?
Well, I'm currently a independent minister, but it was just a joke name, really, that I heard from a friend with whom we like to comment a lot on current affairs, and just making sure that Africa has its voice, because you don't always see a fair and just light on the African continent in the media. So it's important for people to, spread the truth about what's really going on the ground in Africa.
Absolutely correct. I was going to make the point that if Africa doesn't have a minister for propaganda, for information, then it ought to have, because there are a large number of people, some of whom will be watching this show this evening and over the course of the next 7 days, who see Africa as a kind of basket case. As when I was a kid, you used to be told in the church and the school to give a penny for the black babies. It was a charity case. But Africa is not poor, but vastly rich, isn't it?
Yeah, there is an abundance of wealth. I think it was just Uganda just a few weeks ago, or perhaps a month or so ago, that just announced something like $12 trillion in gold deposits were found in the nation.
I'm moving to Uganda when I heard that this Klondike, $12 trillion worth of gold has been discovered in Uganda. I wonder how the United States and the Western Empire will respond to that news, Malik.
Yeah, you're spot on. I don't want a humanitarian intervention or to hear about human rights or the usual spiel that we hear. But let's just
They'll
hope
be
that
needing, yeah, they'll be needing some democracy to go with their gold.
yeah, they will. It's unfortunate. But I hope that the wealth is used for the people. I hope that it actually benefits those who need it, and that good comes towards the way of the Ugandan citizens.
Well, I hope they will not deposit all those trillions of dollars worth of gold in the Bank of England, because there's a very good chance that some guy will be plucked off the street of Kampala and he'll be told, you are the new president of Uganda. We're recognizing you and we're going to freeze your country's gold reserves and let you have the use of them. Because that's what happened in Venezuela.
Yeah, and that's happened all across the African continent. Like I've heard that story so many times. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It really is.
There's a lot of tragedies, of course, still going on. There's a war raging in Ethiopia again. I was telling my children yesterday about my time in the war zone of Ethiopia and Eritrea and Tigray almost 40 years ago. And now again there's war raging there. There's war imminent in the Sudan, where the military tyranny is now being challenged on the streets by the masses and are being shot down. Almost a dozen people were shot dead yesterday. I have no idea about today. What can you tell us about the situation in Sudan?
Yeah, the situation in Sudan, it's been ongoing for quite a while now. There have met various actors, really, like with many other conflicts in the African continent. There are various actors, various interests at play, which is unfortunate because the interests of the actual people living there, the masses, the working class, the black masses of these nations, their interests are never taken into account. They're always at the bottom of the pile. It's not really any different in Sudan. It's really unfortunate. But they're trying, right? They're fighting. They're fighting to make sure that their voice is heard. They're fighting to make sure that that their desire to no longer live under a military government is realized. Because in Sudan, as with Eritrea and other parts of the continent, people have only known one government, right, or one type of government, and that is military government. And that's the furthest thing from democracy. It's the furthest thing from freedom, from justice. And it's not what people want anymore. In the 21st century, we should not be having military governments anywhere on our planet. But these military governments are always popped up by Western interests, either direct Western states or Western corporations too. They often make sure that their interests are protected militarily by these military governments. So in terms of tackling it, I think the Sudanese people also need to make sure that external influences aren't able to impose their will as freely as they've been able to historically and generally throughout the world.
On the other hand, Malik, there is democracy in South Africa, and things are not going so well there. I speak as someone who gave some of the best years of my life to bring about the triumph of the African National Congress. And of course, I wish them well. I wish that they would deliver the Freedom Charter that we fought for, campaigned for. But corruption in democratic countries like South Africa is a recurring problem. And there's the beginnings, I sent the beginnings of an uprising in South Africa against the president, Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you think of that?
Yeah, interesting question. I think that what we've seen in South Africa is, the working classes have been airing their frustrations at this corruption and at general inequality, a lack of progress, a lack of promises being actually made, right? The Freedom Charter and the various potential and promises that came about when apartheid ended. 30 years later, these things haven't really turned into anything concrete. And seeing your leaders be corrupt as open and brazenly as they have just adds petrol to that fire, right? But unfortunately, we've seen much of the South African working classes vent that anger towards immigrants, right? Towards Malawians, towards Zimbabweans, towards Nigerians, other people within the African continent who have come to South Africa to work, to pay their taxes, to follow the law, to be just citizens. They've been the target of so much anger and so much resentment that really should be directed towards these elites, right? Really, it should be directed towards people who are corrupt. Really, it should be directed to those in power, those who are able to actually bring to life the promises of the post-apartheid era. So I hope that there's change. Personally, I believe in the message and the spirit of the economic freedom fighters. I think that they've got a lot to offer, and hopefully they would bring an end to that corruption and bring about the change, the economic change that the country really wants to see.
Malik, how can people follow your work?
Yes, follow me on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. It's Afro Propaganda. That is my handle throughout the web.
Great name, great handle. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Was Elvis the King? Yes, 56. No, 44 on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 31. No, 49 on YouTube. And on Telegram, yes, 56. No, 44. You can vote until the end of the show on those three platforms. Don't let me down. I'll be all shook up if Elvis loses. John is in Wetherby on the euthanasia petition tomorrow. A very interesting subject. John, welcome to the show. What do you want to say?
Good evening, George. Nice to meet you again and speak to you. It is Dave here from Wetherby, and a pleasure to be on the show here, George. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, George. Congratulations on the book as well, and that's good as another writer. That's really interesting, and love to your family. I want to also, before my 2 points, mention a special congratulations to Brooke Kinsella on the birth of her baby boy. The Workers' Party, we had an event around raising awareness for knife crime and that very important issue. So sending love and best wishes.
Yes, very, very best wishes. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, George. And I just wanted to, before my speaking about this subject, to just I've spoken to many unpaid carers, many of who are in more difficult circumstances than myself, and I would just like to give a call out to the unpaid carers. Currently, the carers allowance is just under £70 a week, regardless of whether you care for how many, one or more people. I'd just like to say, not from myself, but to give a salute that without the unpaid carers from right across all backgrounds, that we wouldn't have a health and social care system that's not done for money.
Absolutely correct.
Thank you, George. There's no pension, there's no staff benefit, there's nothing like that. So I just wanted to give a salute to, in this case, it's a case of those that are paid the least. We could not do without. Thank you, George. So I understand this is an emotional and a difficult subject for people. So thank you for giving me time, George. And to everybody in the show, listeners, viewers, and contributors, I think it's important that now is the time to say it, because it is something that is happening here and now. I believe in democracy and people having a right to express their views. I just think at this time now, as the a debate is tomorrow, I would like to share my view on this.
Go on.
Thank you, George. The debate, it's reached however many signatories and is taking place in Westminster. It's on the schedule, and it is around the assisted dying and assisted suicide. Like I say, to emphasize, I understand people have a right to different viewpoints. It's a very emotive and difficult subject. I just think at this time, I think it's not something one can easily be neutral on. You have to say if you're for or against it. I'm going to add my voice with the permission of yourself, George, and the members here, that I am, always have been and always will be, firmly opposed to any changes in the law to allow assisted dying or assisted suicide. I believe the threat to the dependent, the most vulnerable, the most desperate in our society is simply too great, and therefore assisted dying or legalized assisted suicide must never become law in this country. Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Bravo. I agree entirely, and spoke, I hope, powerfully in Parliament against this subject, against this euthanasia, legalized murder, many times. I have the most profound feelings of opposition to it, which, as you say, does not mean that the pressures on people who are terminally ill, who have lost hope, are not themselves profound, and that the pressures on people without pay and without any kind of remittance or relief are condemned to years, decades of caring for people who are terminally ill, helpless, hopeless, and so on, that these are not deep, deep mines of anguish and of pain and of doubt. But I have a moral and religious obligation to oppose it, not just because it is morally wrong to end the life of someone, even if that person is asking you to do so, because they could be asking you to do so because they are ill, because they are depressed, because they feel hopeless. And there may be other ways that hopelessness, that depression, and that illness can and should be dealt with. So I'm against it for those reasons, but I'm against it as a socialist for anti-capitalist reasons also. I believe that euthanasia is the capitalist's wet dream. After all, by definition, when you're in a vegetative state, or when you are suffering from untreatable and chronic illnesses that will never allow you to return to the workplace again, you are no longer a profit center, but a big debit. They'll have to pay for you one way or another to be kept alive, at home, or later kept alive in an expensive hospital environment. If capitalism was a person and it could kill anyone that it liked, it would kill the one that will never again turn a penny of profit. And it is comparatively easy to turn people into killers for capitalism. It's very easy to imagine relatives, even family members, even husbands and wives that would like to see the back of you, either because they think you've suffered long enough, or because they'd quite like to see what's in your will and quite like to spend it. I wouldn't trust, and I don't think you should, anybody to decide whether you live or die. As a religious believer, I believe that that is God's job, not yours. So if I was in Parliament tomorrow, I would speak as strongly as I can against this legalized killing, which is what euthanasia is. But here's the rub, and I don't have time to do this justice. This is all happening anyway, without changes in the law, without parliamentary debate, without anyone having to go to the bother of persuading the electorate that this is the pathway down which we should go. Judges are making euthanasia decisions without the authority of Parliament, never mind the authority of the people. Judges are deciding that not only medical help can be discontinued, but even in a very famous case in the Liverpool pathway, even food and water, you can starve a patient in a hospital to death if you can persuade a judge to turn off the feeding, turn off the food, turn off the water. Imagine that. So if there's one thing worse than the government legislating for legalized killing, it's judge-led legalized killing. This is a subject we'll have to return to. Thanks, Dave, for bringing it up. The super chats are coming in fantastic. Rim donated, I think it's Swedish krona, 55, and says, how's it going? Great show. Well, it's better now that you have given that very generous donation. Stu Janine donated £2 and says, keep shining the light, brother. Thank you very much. Now, if you don't want to donate on the super chat, you can go to moats.tv and find the donate button. You enter your card details. You can pledge any amount in any currency that you like. You can also PayPal me, George Galloway UK. It's very important you don't forget the UK. paypal.me/George Galloway UK. That's open all week. A last break before the last half hour. I'll be right back.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got that on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education. with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
A big thank you to all that came to the Copthorne Hotel in Newcastle on Monday night. It was a fantastic night. I think everyone that was there thoroughly enjoyed it, and everyone that was there was mightily impressed by the film. Directed by the great Irish director Sean Murray, produced by Gayatri and me, and we're now on tour with it around the country. We'll be having other public events, because I actually do think that a public event is the best place to watch the film. But if you can't get to or can't wait for the next public event, should probably be in the Greater Manchester area, then you can rent it very cheaply on Vimeo, or you can buy it on Amazon, or if you want signed, sealed, delivered, then you can get it from my shop, which the details I'm sure our team will put up on the screen. Let's take a call from Richard in Manchester. Always a pleasure, Richard.
Always a pleasure to speak to you, one of the finest men in the world, George. And if people don't buy The Killing of Kelly and look at it and absorb it and analyze it, they're missing something great in the history of this country, I'll tell you.
It's most kind. Yes, breaking news.
I've got some breaking news. Tony Blair's been seen looking out a window of one of his big houses, singing one for the money and two for the show. And he's actually been to see the Elvis thing, and he heard about the £7 trillion of gold found in Uganda, and he's on his way to Uganda.
I'm sure he is, although he might not be welcome there, because he took against Museveni, the president there, who is said by people like Blair to be too pro-China. So I expect there will be an attempt to overthrow President Museveni, even though he's been there for decades. And I'm sure that China will be doing everything it can to defend him. So look out for Uganda becoming the new hotspot in Africa. After all, you know, business is business, Richard, and gold is gold. Gold is gold. Tony's got to get his hands on it. Yes, yeah, Tony Blair is big in Africa.
He's got his jet, it's all wound up, and off he's going to make another trillion. I don't know. The world's coming to something. But I've got to tell you this, George. I started to watch your show last night. And it wasn't until Gowan come on, the American commentator, I'd realised that I'd watched that episode last Sunday night. And
that was last week's show.
Last week's show.
Look,
so I watched it twice. I'll tell you what,
it was
still very good.
Richard, we're getting older. These things can happen. Thanks very much indeed for that wonderful call. Eves is in Idaho. Let's hear from Idaho. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello, George. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you to have guessed it right. The last time I was interrupted, you know, somehow I was talking about Julian Assange.
Yeah.
And you finished. What I wanted to tell you today is that, you know, we have this saying in French. It's from the philosopher Pascal, and he says, "The heart has its reason that reason doesn't know." And that applies to the U.S. foreign policy pretty well. You can say, you know, Janet Yellen has its reason that reason doesn't know when she proposes, I don't know, to have Russian oil cheaper than other oil. It doesn't make any sense at all. But what I wanted to tell you is why she's so worried and come up with crazy proposal like that. And what I wanted to tell you is that there is this gas for ruble business. And I don't know if you're like me, but when I hear it, I can see that there is something missing there. It doesn't make that much sense. You cannot have a guy coming with some euros and be given some ruble when you know very well that the euro are not usable for the person who has ruble, and the ruble is not usable for the person who has euro. So what must happen? Yeah, I mean, and nobody really spelled that out. And my conclusion is that there is a middleman somewhere who buys and sells a third commodity, which you can buy with ruble and euro, and this is probably gold. So essentially, when Germany comes with a bunch of euros, you have somebody buying gold with it, give the gold to the Russian, who put that in their coffer, and the Federal Bank of Russia prints the ruble corresponding to that gold, which makes de facto the ruble collateralized by gold. It's just like that. And this is a death for the dollar.
In the end it is, yeah. Although not immediately, Yves, but in the end it is, yeah. Because the Russian currency, and the Chinese for that matter, is based on real economic hard facts. Precious metals as well as commodities and raw materials for which there is an insatiable market. What's the market for American products now?
Well, yeah, that's why we have terrible inflation. But you see what happened, because you mentioned that a little earlier, and it was correct, but I think incomplete. You said the Bretton Woods settlement was the Western system, and now it's time to change. But between Bretton Woods and now, there was the Vietnam War, which make America blink financially, and then they stop the conversion from gold to dollar in 1973, I believe.
Yeah,
and
Richard Nixon
that,
took them off the gold standard.
That's right. And but they still wanted to be the only global currency in the world. But from that date, they have to impose that by force. See, as long as the dollar was collateralized by gold, well, if you don't like the dollar, you get gold. If you don't like the dollar, you see what I mean? It was okay.
Of course.
But as soon as you say, well, now you don't have the thing, but you still have to use the dollar, that's coercive. And the deficit came up and up and up and up and up, and less people wanted to use the dollar, and more war happened, and that's where we are today.
Well said. And for this time of night, that's all we have time for on Yves, but it was a very, very clear call. Thanks. Erebos is in New York. Erebos, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Salubrious evening or night to you.
Thank you.
And as always, I can't continue any further, or I won't continue any further, because I never take life for granted. We are here today, and then we're gone before we even realize it. I want to wish you, your family, your friends, optimal health, salubrious strength in the present and going forward.
Thank you. God bless you. Thanks.
My observation, and I'll just do a very short preamble, is the rise of fascism in the Anglosphere, in the Western world. And this short preamble is by Frederick L. Schuman, who wrote Europe on the Eve, The Crisis of Diplomacy, 1933 to 1939, page 154. And he says, fascism is a phenomenon of the defeated and frustrated. It is a phenomenon of marginal classes and marginal nations, of those driven by debasement and fear into hatred and malice for the supposed authors of their anxieties. It is a phenomenon of national impotence and social decay. The impotent worship of power. Those who are weak and afraid conceal their self-pity in creeds of virility and brutality. And the reason why I wanted to do that preamble is because, and you know this better than I do, but I'm thinking about the rise of Mussolini and Hitler, Franco, Marshal Pétain, and the rest of these people after World War I into World War II. And the common thread of all these societies was extreme poverty, right? With what happened with Germany and much of Europe and these places. Like I said, you and a lot of the viewers would know this better than I. But I'm seeing the parallels, and I've been seeing it all my life. I mean, I'm only 51, but I don't think that I've experienced a decade without poverty. And I can, from what I'm seeing here, is the same fertile ground that gives rise to these, these extreme personalities, the charismatic demagogue and people like this. And, I'm seeing it with people like DeSantis. Nobody's addressing the economic substantive issues that materially benefit our lives. It's all culture war madness and nonsense. And we're yelling at a chasm at each other from a distance. But until you improve the lives of people economically, they're going to gravitate to the things that they've been conditioned to hate. And then we get to that place of the war and the civil war and the culture war, and it becomes violent and it becomes ugly. And I'll just finish with this. The only people that benefit are the parasite billionaire class. They did that during the Gilded Age, the Industrial Age, and now these finance capital predators and parasites. They're the only ones that benefit from us attacking and going at each other and the rise of the demagogue. So I just wanted to share this with you, George, because I know the hour is late.
Yeah, but it's a devastating and quite poetic soliloquy for which I thank you. There's not really much to say to complement it in the sense that it was a perfect description of this fertile ground that we now have. I don't believe that Western countries are fascist, but we are headed that way. We may be some distance away. There is time to turn back. There is the opportunity to stop it. As Bob Dylan might put it, it's not dark yet, but it's getting there. Thanks very much, Erebus, for that call. Patrick is in British Columbia, in Canada, where I've toured many a time. Patrick, welcome.
Thanks for having me. And by the way, good Time Out of Mind reference. That's one of my favorite Dylan albums.
Thanks.
Just wanted to ask you about the World Cup. What do you think is going to happen in Group B? We've got England, Iran, Wales, and America. What do you think happens there?
Well, I'm hoping Iran come out on top. I mean no disrespect to any of the other teams, particularly the English ones. I'm not one of these Scottish football people who want anybody to win but England. That's not me. But I think that if Iran were to triumph, even get a draw against England, even get a draw, maybe a win against the United States, that would be such a symbolic blow to the two countries who more than any other have caused such misery in Iran. Not just of late and nothing to do with the nuclear deal, but since the overthrow of democracy in Iran by Britain and the United States. Since the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh, who would have transformed Iran into a modern social democratic country, but was overthrown in a violent CIA MI6 coup. Wouldn't it be a great revenge for Mossadegh? Patrick, what's your feeling?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. 100%. I've got money on Iran to hopefully come out on top. But yeah, that would be amazing.
They're actually good.
If they could beat England,
they're actually good.
If they could beat England and America, wow, that would just be amazing. And yeah, you're right. They played really well in that pool. With I think them and South Korea came out on top. But yeah, no, they played well.
Here's what I was thinking. I come up with an entrepreneurial idea a day, but I don't have the capital to make them happen. And some of them are bad ideas. But I was thinking today of the you know, Russia will probably never again play in European Championship or in the World Cup. And it won't be long before they ban other countries to Belarus, for example, almost certain to be banned. Iran is not currently banned, but was and might be again, and so on. How about an alternative football tournament? A kind of, I don't know, a BRICS World Cup. Or,
oh, that'd be awesome.
And of course, it wouldn't be, because Brazil not going to pull out the real World Cup, of course, because they've won it more than anyone else. But lower down, if you like, a kind of BRICS Euros, BRICS World Championship, a kind of alternative to the football hegemony of Western countries. If I could make that happen, was it they say on Only Fools and Horses, this time next year we'll be millionaires. Patrick, thanks very much indeed for that lovely call. Gayatri's here with our final social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Malgorzata from Leeds says we need to insist for diplomacy and a peaceful way to resolve conflicts around the world more than ever, especially after the speech of Mike Pompeo at the Hudson Institute, where he admitted what the real aims of the US foreign policy is: continued world domination against the threat of a powerful Eurasian bloc led by China. No talk of democracy or human rights there.
No, look, democracy, shamocracy, they don't give a toss about democracy. They support governments that have never had a vote cast for them in the entire history of the country, Saudi Arabia being a case in point. There are many other Gulf satrapies that are exactly the same. Why don't they ever ask, when's the next election in Saudi Arabia? Where's the freedom of speech and expression and so on? They never do that. And then Julian Assange, they're sending him to his death. This is his birthday, by the way. I can't wish him a happy birthday. Of course he's not having a happy birthday. He's having a miserable birthday because he's facing death at the hands of these democratic hypocrites. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yes, indeed. We all keep Julian Assange in our hearts and prayers. Now I've got a couple for you on Elvis, some positive and negatives. Marek says, I must insist he wasn't, because he never liked to be called the king. To him, Jesus Christ was king, and therefore I never referred to him as the king. And Paul Brown says, he plagiarized gospel, blues, and rhythms, and especially B.B. King, Rufus Thomas, Big Bill Broonzy, Chuck Berry, and Ike Turner.
Well, when you say plagiarized, perhaps you mean popularized. Perhaps you mean that he brought that music to a much wider audience, which absolutely transformed the musical fortunes of black artists like B.B. King, who was a close friend of Elvis, by the way. Indeed, that's depicted in the movie. Mahalia Jackson was a close friend of Elvis. The idea that if you develop the songs and music of others and bring them to a different, new, wider audience, that you are plagiarizing, just defies all the principles of art. Art is about the constant interpretation and reinterpretation of all hitherto existing art. After all, there's only so many musical notes actually in existence. I used to know the exact number. I'll have to look it up. Sorry, Gayatri.
Yeah, this is why I also do not like or agree with the following from Christine Marie, who says that he may be the king of stealing black culture, perhaps. So, in line of what you just said. And then further on, VOB says he agrees. Across multiple genres, from rock and roll to gospel, he changed the game forever. Exactly. In terms of solo artists, only Buddy Holly could have come close had he lived.
Had he lived is indeed the tragic caveat that must be made. Gayatri, thank you very much. Enjoy your holiday in that lovely place. I see you in now. Simon is in London. Let's get through as many calls as we can. Simon in London on Elvis. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing? You okay, George?
All good, thank you.
That's great. Well, my preference was actually Bohemian Rhapsody. I did like Bohemian Rhapsody better than that. What did you think of that one, by the way, George?
What do you mean? The biopic on Freddie, you mean?
Yeah, that's the couple of years ago. That
was very good.
One.
Yeah, it was very, very good, and Rami was fantastic.
Yeah, but I said Elvis was a great film, great music. As I said, it portrayed Elvis in a really good light, which was very, very a credit to all his fans and his family as well. The thing that I'm glad they did pick on was the issue with the Colonel. I've always viewed the Colonel as a Don King type character, like a parasite who latches onto the superstar. In Don King's case, it was various boxers, including Mike Tyson, James Bond, Christian Smith, and Tim Witherspoon as well. Sucked the life out of them, sucked all the money out of them until they were basically nothing of themselves. But one of the things I will say is that it portrays the fact that he was inspired by black artists, gospel choirs, jazz musicians, and guys like B.B. King a lot. As I said, it was great. However, one of the things I saw it as an end of an era for black music back then, because since then, probably since the 1980s, I don't think black music has done much. It probably has done much, but the media has always concentrated on this issue with hip hop. I mean, if you think about it, George, a poster of Elvis on your bedroom was quite normal in the 1970s and possibly before then, maybe even after then. But now, a lot of black people, as I said, and I'm not stereotyping black people here, but I'm just saying a lot of black kids would rather have a Tupac Shakur on their bedroom.
Sure.
As I said.
Sure. And why not? Why not? My wife plays Tupac. Why not? But the fact remains. No, not mine. The fact remains, Simon, Elvis is the biggest selling solo artist in all history. Must have been doing something right. Thanks for the call. Peter is in Warrington. Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, hi, George. How are you doing?
Good. I drove through Warrington today.
Okay, it's a busy place. It's really the size of a city now. It's actually still a town, but it's going for city status. It's a big place. I'd like
maybe we'll do a showing. Maybe we'll do a Killing Kelly showing in Warrington. I've got a lot of friends there. Anyway, go on.
I'd like to talk about the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known as NASA.
Okay.
And yeah, NASA have loads of photographs of Mars and the moon, and yet they're not releasing them to the public. I've emailed NASA asking them to do this, but they're not doing it. And I'd like somebody like you to put your weight behind it.
And what do you suspect might be behind this?
I don't know. I mean, there's all sorts of theories on the moon. I've got a book in front of me, Who Built the Moon? And it's by two guys, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. And they suggest, could it be that the moon is artificial? Could it even be hollow? A seeming impossibility for a natural planetary object. Extraordinary claims indeed, but keep an open mind and read the compelling arguments based on scientific evidence and irrefutable logic, arguments that will completely change the way we think of our world. So these guys are suggesting...
It could be made of green cheese.
I thought you might say that somehow. I thought you were going to get that one in. But,
I know who made the moon and the earth and the stars and the suns and the universes and the galaxies. The Almighty did. Nothing comes from nothing. A creator created them. That is something that I simply contest to be incontestable. Kevin in Suffolk, let's hear from him. Go ahead, Kev.
All right, George, nice to talk to you again. Right, I'm coming at this a bit late. I've only just seen your intro. So basically, I think Boris is an idiot. I thought he was better than this. I thought he'd rise to it. I thought he'd see through a real Brexit. And I think, you know, what's going on, I think he's probably going to get taken down. Partly through his fault, partly through, like, you know what the situation is. It's a Blairite media, Blairite civil service, you know, stitching him up, leaking like a sieve. And we are going to end up back in the single market, and we'll be back in the EU. If there's anything of the EU, we'll be back in it in 10 years. So
that's a big if. It's a big if, Kev, but go on.
Well, okay, so my question is, I mean, if Boris goes, I don't think the powers behind the Labour Party and the powers that I'm talking about, I think they're going to provide some cover for Starmer because I think he's their best man, basically. So how do you see it playing out? I mean, how do we get through? I mean, at least in the US, you had we know what's happened. I mean, that it's just as bad over there. But there was the possibility of someone like Trump or possibly Bernie Sanders breaking through and smashing this. I'm going to swear, smashing this messed up fucking system we've got. Sorry, because I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it, George. You know. The West is just screwed, and we've had 30 years of like appalling leadership. And I thought 2016 was going to start turning things around, and I thought we could get democracy back, but it hasn't happened. You know, it just hasn't happened. And
it hasn't happened in either country. Of course, a lot of the opposition to Boris Johnson is about Brexit. It is about returning to the single market, even about rejoining the European Union, though I don't believe that latter will ever happen, and I don't believe the European Union is much longer for this world. And I believe that Trump will come back as it happens in 2024, which is why they are so desperately trying to destroy his ability to be a candidate through the January 6th Jamboree. Kevin, I can't do justice to your excellent call because of the hour. It's 9:57 nearly, and I've got a legend on the line. And you know the rules. Everything has to be cleared for the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Norma, welcome.
Hello, George. Good show tonight.
Thank you.
Lots going on, but not much good news, is there?
No, unfortunately not.
No. Anyway, I'm actually amazed to hear. I know there's always been bars in Parliament, but 19 subsidised
19 bars, yes. 19.
It's absolutely ridiculous. You see, most people, even those that work unsocial hours, they don't have bars, do they? And
certainly not subsidised by the taxpayer.
Well, no, and I mean, look at the nurses and lots of people. They work till 1 o'clock in the morning. They've got to get home. Oh my God! But the thing is,
and why should people drink at work? Because they shouldn't, because their performance will be impaired. And if you doubt that MP's performance is impaired, you've not been paying attention.
Well, no, because James Callaghan, he was the one-time Prime Minister. He was teetotal. And he said if he drank alcohol, it would affect his judgment. And I thought that was wise, you know.
Well, I mean, it stands to reason. A nurse or a surgeon wouldn't drink at work because it would affect the quality of their work.
Yeah.
A truck driver wouldn't drink in the cab because he knows that it would damage his ability to drive the truck. And yet we've got people. I mean stupid drunk, Norma. I'm not talking about people sipping a shandy or a baby sham. I'm talking about people that are stupid drunk, unable properly to walk in a straight line, unable to talk properly, fighting each other, groping each other. What is this groping? Norma, what's the pleasure in groping somebody? Why are they going around forcing their sexual attentions on people who don't want it in public, in Parliament?
Well, George, you know what it is? There's deadly sins, and one of it's lust. And that's what it is.
I've been struck by lust. I've been struck by lust
well,
in
we all
my
have
day.
a bit.
But I never went around groping people. Certainly not at the public's expense. And certainly not whilst stupid drunk. Every day of my life vindicates my late father's exhortations that drink is the curse of the working class. It's certainly the curse of the political class, and they are proving it virtually every day. Well, it's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place, for the mother of all talk shows. I'll be joining Gayatri on holiday, so although I will be presenting the show, it'll have to be a little bit shorter than the normal show. But join me, and join me for the Galloway show on Wednesday nights until October. Good night.